He was 17 years old. He had been in the Marine Corps for 3 years, and in about 4 seconds he was going to make a decision that should have killed him. His name was Jacklyn Harold Lucas, Jack to his friends, and on February 20, 1945, on a volcanic island called Iwo Jima, he threw himself onto 2 Japanese grenades to save the lives of 3 fellow Marines. Both grenades exploded. More than 200 pieces of shrapnel tore through his body. His right arm was shattered. His wrist was nearly severed. His chest, his legs, his face, all ripped apart by the blast. And somehow, impossibly, Jacklyn Lucas survived. He would become the youngest Marine in World War II to receive the Medal of Honor. He would shake hands with President Harry Truman at the White House, still bandaged from his wounds. He would live another 63 years, carrying over 200 pieces of Japanese steel in his body until the day he died. But his story doesn't begin on Iwo Jima. It begins in North Carolina, with a 14-year-old boy who wanted so badly to fight that he was willing to break every rule to do it. This is the story of Jack Lucas, the boy who lied his way into war, and the impossible moment that made him a legend. Jacklyn Lucas was born on February 14, 1928, in Plymouth, North Carolina, Valentine's Day. His mother would later say it was fitting because from the moment he was born, he had a heart bigger than his body could contain. Plymouth was a small town then, barely 4,000 people. The Great Depression hit hard. Jack's family wasn't wealthy, but they got by. His father ran a tobacco warehouse, his mother kept the house, and Jack, from the earliest age, was different. He was big for his age. By 13, he stood 5'8" and weighed over 180 pounds. He had the body of a grown man, and he had a personality to match, headstrong, fearless, absolutely convinced that he was meant for something greater than a small town in North Carolina. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Jack Lucas was 13 years old. He was sitting in a movie theater when the news came. The manager stopped the film and made an announcement. America was at war. For most 13-year-olds, the war would have been an abstraction, something happening far away, fought by adults. But Jack Lucas was not most 13-year-olds. He walked out of that theater with one thought in his mind. He was going to fight. The problem was obvious. You had to be 17 to enlist in the military with parental consent, 18 without it. Jack was 4 years too young. 4 years of watching other men go off to war while he sat in school. 4 years of waiting while history happened without him. Jack Lucas decided he wasn't going to wait. In August 1942, Jack Lucas walked into a Marine Corps recruiting station. He was 14 years old. He told the recruiter he was 17. He had forged his mother's signature on the consent form. And when the recruiter looked at this big, confident kid and asked if he was sure about his age, Jack looked him straight in the eye and said yes. The recruiter believed him, or maybe he didn't care. The Marine Corps was expanding rapidly, desperate for bodies to fill the ranks. If a kid wanted to fight and he looked old enough to hold a rifle, that was good enough. Jack Lucas became a United States Marine at the age of 14, the youngest Marine in World War II. He was sent to Parris Island for boot camp. The drill instructors worked to break down every recruit, to strip away their civilian identity and rebuild them as Marines. For most young men, it was the hardest thing they had ever done. For Jack Lucas, It was exactly what he had been waiting for. He excelled at everything: marksmanship, physical training, hand-to-hand combat. He was stronger than most of the older recruits, tougher than men who had years on him. The drill instructors noticed. This kid was special. After boot camp, Jack was assigned to the 6th Base Depot in North Carolina, then to Camp Lejeune, then to Hawaii. Each assignment took him closer to the Pacific, closer to the war, but not close enough. The Marine Corps had a policy. Soldiers under 18 were not supposed to be sent into combat. Jack's paperwork said he was 17, which should have been old enough. But someone along the chain of command had gotten suspicious. His orders kept getting changed. Assignments that should have put him on a ship to the Pacific were mysteriously canceled. By late 1944, Jack Lucas had been a Marine for over 2 years. He had trained harder than anyone. He had qualified expert with every weapon. And he was still stuck in Hawaii, driving a truck, while the war raged thousands of miles away. He had lied to get into the Marines. Now he was going to have to break the rules again to get into combat. In January 1945, Jack Lucas learned that a massive convoy was forming in Hawaii. Ships were being loaded with Marines, equipment, and supplies. The destination was secret, but everyone knew it was going to be big. This was the invasion fleet for Iwo Jima. Jack had no orders to join the convoy. His superiors had made sure of that. But Jack Lucas had never let rules stop him before. On the night before the convoy departed, Jack Lucas went AWOL. He snuck away from his unit, made his way to the harbor, and stowed away aboard the USS WWII, a troop transport ship. He hid in the ship's storage areas, surviving on stolen food and water, waiting for the convoy to get far enough from Hawaii that it would be impossible to send him back. For 6 days he remained hidden. 6 days in the dark, cramped spaces of the ship, listening to the sounds of hundreds of Marines above him preparing for the invasion. 6 days of knowing that if he was discovered, he would face court-martial, desertion, prison, disgrace. But Jack Lucas wasn't afraid of court-martial. He was afraid of missing the war. On the 6th day, when the convoy was far out at sea, Jack finally revealed himself. He walked onto the deck and presented himself to a stunned officer. He explained who he was, how he had gotten aboard, and why he had done it. The ship's captain could have put him in the brig. He could have radioed back to Hawaii and had Jack arrested the moment they made landfall. Instead, he looked at this 17-year-old kid who had risked everything just for a chance to fight, and he made a decision. Jack Lucas was assigned to a rifle company in the 1st Battalion, 26th Marines, 5th Marine Division. He was given a weapon, basic equipment, and told to prepare for the assault. The court-martial could wait until after the battle, if he survived. Jack Lucas was going to get his war. Iwo Jima, 8 square miles of volcanic rock and black sand, roughly 600 miles south of Tokyo. The Japanese had turned it into one of the most heavily fortified positions in the Pacific. Over 20,000 defenders were dug into a network of tunnels, bunkers, and pillboxes that had been under construction for months. The American military needed the island. Its airfields would provide emergency landing strips for B-29 bombers returning from raids on Japan. Its capture would break the inner ring of Japanese defenses and bring the war one step closer to ending. The price would be terrible. Everyone knew it. The brass estimated 30 days of fighting. They were optimistic. On the morning of February 19, 1945, the Marines hit the beach. Jack Lucas was in one of the first waves. He was 17 years old, and he had never fired a shot in anger. Around him, men were dying before they even reached the sand. Japanese artillery and machine guns raked the landing craft. The black volcanic sand made it almost impossible to dig in. That first day, the 5th Marine Division suffered over 2,000 casualties. Jack Lucas survived. He helped carry wounded men to aid stations. He dug foxholes in the ashy sand that collapsed as fast as he could shovel. He learned what combat really meant, not the glory he had imagined, but blood and terror and the screams of dying men. The next morning, February 20th, Jack's unit moved inland. They were advancing through a ravine, trying to clear Japanese positions one by one. The fighting was close and brutal. You couldn't see the enemy until he was right on top of you. Every pile of rocks might hide a sniper. Every cave entrance might conceal a machine gun. Jack was moving with a fire team, 4 Marines picking their way through the broken terrain. They dropped into a ravine, using the terrain for cover. They didn't know that Japanese soldiers were hidden just yards away, waiting. And then the grenades came. There were 2 of them, Japanese Type 97 fragmentation grenades. They landed in the ravine, rolling across the volcanic sand toward the 4 Marines. In a confined space like that, 2 grenades would kill everyone. Jack Lucas saw them. He didn't think. He didn't calculate the odds. He didn't weigh his life against the lives of his companions. There was no time for any of that. There were only the grenades, the men beside him, and a choice that had to be made in less than a heartbeat. Jack threw himself on the first grenade, covering it with his body. Then he reached out, grabbed the second grenade, and pulled it underneath him as well. 2 grenades, under his chest. He had less than 4 seconds to live. The first grenade exploded. The blast tore into Jack's chest and right arm. Shrapnel ripped through his body. The concussion slammed his head against the ground. But his body absorbed the blast. The 3 Marines beside him were showered with sand and debris, but they were alive. The second grenade did not explode. It was a dud. The fuse had failed. If it had detonated, Jack Lucas would have been killed instantly. His body would have been destroyed, and the 3 men beside him might have died as well. But by some miracle, some impossible chance, the second grenade did not go off. Jack Lucas lay in the ravine, torn apart by the first explosion, the second grenade still under his body. The 3 Marines he had saved pulled him out, called for a corpsman, and began fighting to keep him alive. He was 17 years old. He had been in combat for less than 2 days, and he had just performed one of the most extraordinary acts of heroism in the history of the Marine Corps. The corpsman who reached Jack Lucas didn't expect him to survive. Nobody did. The wounds were catastrophic. His right arm was nearly severed at the wrist. His chest was torn open. Shrapnel had penetrated almost every part of his body. He had lost so much blood that his skin had turned gray. But Jack Lucas was alive, barely, and he intended to stay that way. He was evacuated from Iwo Jima on the same day he was wounded. He went first to a hospital ship, then to Guam, then to a series of military hospitals in the United States. The surgeons counted over 250 pieces of shrapnel in his body. They removed most of them. Some were too deep, too close to vital organs to risk extraction. Those pieces would remain inside him for the rest of his life. He underwent 21 surgeries over the next several months. His right arm was saved, though it would never have full function again. His chest was reconstructed. The scars would cover his body forever, a permanent map of what he had endured. Meanwhile, the paperwork caught up with him. The Marine Corps had to deal with the fact that their young hero had technically been a deserter when he performed his heroic act. He had gone AWOL from his unit in Hawaii. He had stowed away on a ship. He had violated orders that were specifically designed to keep him out of combat. And then there was the matter of his age. Jack Lucas was 17, but his enlistment papers said he was 17 because he had enlisted at 14, claiming to be 17. The arithmetic didn't work. Someone had finally done the math. The Marine Corps could have court-martialed him. They could have discharged him dishonorably. They could have made an example of this kid who had broken every rule in the book. Instead, they recommended him for the Medal of Honor. On October 5, 1945, Jack Lucas stood in the White House. He was still recovering from his wounds. His arm was still bandaged. He was still only 17 years old, and President Harry S. Truman was about to hang the Medal of Honor around his neck. The citation was read aloud. It described what Jack had done on Iwo Jima, how he had thrown himself on 2 grenades, how he had absorbed the blast with his own body, how he had saved the lives of 3 fellow Marines through an act of selfless courage that defied comprehension. Truman placed the medal around Jack's neck. Then the president looked at this kid, this 17-year-old who had lied his way into the Marines, who had stowed away on a ship to get into battle, who had thrown himself on grenades to save his friends, and Truman said something that Jack would remember for the rest of his life. "I would rather have this medal than be president." Jack Lucas became the youngest serviceman to receive the Medal of Honor in World War II. He remains the youngest Marine in history to receive the award. He was 17 years, 6 days old. Most stories would end there. The young hero receives his medal, the war ends, everyone lives happily ever after. But Jack Lucas wasn't built for a quiet life. He never had been. After the war, Jack returned to North Carolina. He finished high school. He tried college, but found it boring. He got married, got divorced, got married again. He struggled with the same restlessness that had driven him to enlist at 14. In the 1950s, he joined the Army, not the Marines this time, but the Army. He went through paratrooper training at Fort Benning, and during a training jump, his parachute failed to open properly. Jack Lucas survived his second brush with certain death. He pulled his reserve chute at the last moment, landing hard enough to break his legs and his pelvis. The doctors were amazed he lived, but by now everyone who knew Jack Lucas had stopped being amazed at what he could survive. He recovered. He finished his Army service. He went into business. He got married a 3rd time, finally finding lasting happiness with a woman named Ruby. He became a motivational speaker, traveling the country to tell his story to schools and civic groups and anyone who would listen. And he never forgot Iwo Jima. He returned to the island several times over the years, walking the beaches where he had landed, visiting the ravine where he had thrown himself on those grenades. He remembered the 3 Marines whose lives he had saved. He remembered the friends who didn't make it home. Jack Lucas died on June 5, 2008. He was 80 years old. The shrapnel from Iwo Jima was still inside his body, just as it had been for 63 years. His funeral was held at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. The Marines came out to pay their respects to one of their own, one of the bravest men who had ever worn the uniform. In his later years, Jack was often asked why he did it. Why did he throw himself on those grenades? What was going through his mind in that moment? His answer was always the same. "I didn't think about it. I just did it. Those were my buddies. I couldn't let them die." That's the thing about heroes. They don't see themselves as heroes. They see themselves as people who did what had to be done. Jack Lucas lied about his age because he wanted to serve his country. He stowed away on a ship because he wanted to fight alongside his fellow Marines. And he threw himself on grenades because, in that moment, there was no other choice he could make. He was 17 years old. He was a kid from North Carolina who had no business being on that island, and he became one of the greatest heroes in American military history. The Marine Corps has a saying, "Once a Marine, always a Marine." Jack Lucas lived that saying every day of his life. From the moment he walked into that recruiting station at 14 years old to the day he was buried at Arlington, he was a Marine, and no one who served with him, no one who heard his story, no one who knew what he did on Iwo Jima could ever doubt that he had earned that title. He lied about his age, he broke the rules, he did everything wrong according to the regulations, and when it mattered most, he did everything right.